We're here, everyone. So we are live. I have Kathryn with us, and she's an OCD advocate. Brought her on. Been following her for a while. Just love her story, love her energy, and the education that she puts out there. So, funny story. This was supposed to happen like months ago. I feel like at this point,
Yeah.
Kathryn was supposed to be on one of the very first webinars, and it was my mistake. Got her the wrong link. And so it's been a long time coming. We've been working on this for a while. It's been planned for a while, and we didn't mess up this time. So we're here. We're back. So, super awesome background. I'll let her kind of share her background a little bit, kind of what brings her to this live. And yeah, you might otherwise know her on Instagram as The Road to Recovery from OCD. There are some underscores in there. But while I link your Instagram page, Kathryn, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what brings you to OCD advocacy?
Yeah, so my name is Kathryn. I am currently 19 years old. I'm from San Francisco, California, and I'm going to be starting my sophomore year in college in end of August, actually. And I'm studying clinical psychology, actually, with the hope of eventually becoming an OCD therapist. So kind of that's down the line for me, hopefully. But I got started with OCD advocacy and just spreading awareness when I was struggling significantly with my own OCD when I was in the middle of my high school career. And I had a really difficult time. And what I noticed was a ton of people just did not know what OCD was. So they thought they knew what OCD was, but obviously they kind of associated it with stereotypical, cleanliness, perfectionism, and that just kind of being the gist of it and not really understanding the severity of it.
Mm-hmm. And especially back then, that had to have been, I mean, I feel like we still don't talk about it and there's still so much to be talked about, but even back then, I feel like it was even worse.
Oh, completely. And that was around when a lot of the stuff with Khloe Kardashian was coming out. She's launched her whole CloCD campaign branding line. And it was around then. And I was struggling so significantly with my own OCD. I missed almost an entire year of high school to go to treatment and just really was suffering to that extent. And I started my account just initially for just my immediate peer group to just kind of gain a better understanding of what OCD was and what I was going through, because it's much easier to explain things online versus in person. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to do that. Just explain to someone in person, oh, this is all that I experienced. And sometimes it's a little easier, especially it being such, social media being such a key component of teenage life now. So I started doing it through there and it grew into a passion and so much more.
Yeah. And the OCD community on Instagram it's
incredible.
It's absolutely incredible.
The best.
I laugh all the time because I used to hate social media. I was one of those people who 5 minutes on my phone every day, and that was too much. Tried to actively stay off of social media. But with the pandemic, I discovered that the OCD community on Instagram is so strong. So even if you guys don't have an Instagram, go and look at these accounts. There's so much awesome, accessible information. And the community is just really strong. So I urge all of you. Yeah. I tagged Kathryn in her account, and we all tend to follow each other and find each other. Yeah, it's just really awesome, free, accessible information. It's a great bridge, if you don't have access to treatment, or if you're kind of in between or not sure, it's a really great opportunity, great place to learn more. So I'm on Instagram as well. I'm at Jenna.Overbaugh, just my name with a little dot in the middle. And I did, if you guys scroll up, whether it's on the Facebook Live or the YouTube Live, I did tag her as well. So I'm sure throughout the live, we'll hear a little bit more about what it is that you struggled with. And I would especially love to hear more about what treatment was like for you, because it's so unique to have someone who lived that treatment, especially such an intensive treatment that you did. It's just such a unique experience. So
definitely.
Let's go. This is why I love having you on here. Like having an OCD advocate on here, like someone who's actually lived through it and is living through it.
Yeah.
So this is from Andrea. So I'm struggling a little bit with sitting with the discomfort / uncertainty of contamination. How do you be okay, or how can you be okay when OCD says not to be? And I think this could, whatever we answer here, Kathryn, like it's going to apply to everything.
Every subset. Yeah.
And I want to like preface all of my lives with that. So even if we have a question about contamination, and even if our response is specific to contamination, we know that OCD is the doubt disorder. And whether it's existential OCD or real event OCD or contamination or whatever, sexual intrusive thoughts, harm intrusive thoughts, everything that we're saying is completely applicable to all those other subtypes. So even though right now, you know, we might be talking specifically about contamination because that's what's in the question, take what we say and just adapt it to your own subtype because it's still totally transferable information. So how to be okay when OCD says not to be. Kathryn, I usually start, but I really want to hear your perspective.
Honestly, OCD is like the biggest liar. I've come to learn that there are so many situations where OCD will just be like, oh, you're not okay. You shouldn't be okay. This is something
you don't deserve to be okay. You don't deserve.
Oh, you don't deserve to be okay. Oh yeah, it's all the, you know, the guilt tripping is a really fun thing that OCD likes to bring on. But what I typically would say is honestly, like anything, it just takes time and practice is something that I've really learned is that the more that you sit with the uncertainty, the easier it becomes. Because I mean, I think of it as like any sort of like practice or any sport or activity. It's kind of like something that you just need to keep on doing and doing and doing to the point where it just becomes just automatic, to the point where it becomes easier. I mean, it's still going to be difficult regardless of how long you've been doing it for. And I know that like I've been in recovery for a long time now and it's still difficult for me. But yeah, I think definitely just something over time is just, you know, reminding yourself, but not reassuring yourself to the point where it's like, oh yeah, OCD is told lies in the past. It continues to tell lies daily. And this is just another one of those things. And the best way to deal with it is just by sitting with it.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I like what Kathryn said. I echo it 100%. And I would add that, you know, along the lines of it being a practice that you have to make a habit and just be patient about its development. Think of it like a muscle, right? Like you don't just go into the gym and pick up like 30-pound dumbbells and start doing these awesome bicep curls without any effort, right? Like it takes time and you have to start small. So when it comes to OCD, when it all boils down to is an intolerance of uncertainty or an intolerance, kind of an aversion of discomfort, just being really sensitive to those sensations of anxiety or just that feeling of anxiety. And so what we need to do in order to live a life that we value, in order to live a life that coincides more with how we want to live life, so OCD isn't calling the shots and making all the decisions, what we need to do is just work that muscle. We need to work it. So it's weak. We need to work it. We need to exercise it. And so instead of, you know, the 30-pound dumbbells, what we're going to try to be doing is like maybe start with 5 or 10-pound dumbbells. And instead of bicep curls or push-ups or whatever, we are putting ourselves in these anxiety-provoking situations, feeling uncomfortable, just like a muscular exercise might feel uncomfortable, right? But
yeah.
The more that you kind of strain that muscle, it feels uncomfortable in the moment, but the more muscle you gain, right? So
yeah,
you want to be putting yourself in these anxiety-provoking situations, even though your OCD says, don't be okay with this, you're not okay with this isn't okay. I would say that OCD, I mean, that's just the nature of OCD, right? I've never worked with anyone who says that their OCD is saying these wonderful things, right?
Oh, never.
He's never going to tell you that it's okay. OCD is never going to tell you, you know, especially with contamination, like that's clean, you're okay, you're safe. It's always going to make you doubt. It's always going to make you doubt.
Definitely.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, like, reiterating what you were saying, just along the lines of, like, and that's where, like, exposure and response prevention comes in. Just putting yourself in these anxiety provoking situations, these situations that trigger your OCD tremendously, but obviously, like, doing it using, an exposure hierarchy, doing like small exposures and then bigger, medium ones, and then bigger ones, just building up to that.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, just kind of training that muscle and building it over time. And it's just not going to come immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And ask yourself too, you can all ask yourself this question when it comes to like, well, how do I do that? How do I do that? How do I do that? Ask yourself, well, what does it look like to sit with the discomfort?
Yeah.
If you were sitting with the discomfort of contamination, what would you be doing? Who would you be hanging out with? Where would you be going? How would you wake up in the morning? What would your day look like? How would a third person who's totally removed from that situation be able to say like, wow, that person's living their life. They're living their life.
Yeah.
Their OCD is not making any decisions for them. They are actively sitting with uncertainty and they are, going in the direction of that contamination. What would you be doing? And I think that will provide you with some visual goals and some visual targets, and then go do those things. Go do those things. You can feel irresponsible. You can feel dirty. It's going to feel that way. Do the things anyway. That's courage, right? The definition of courage is to be scared and do it anyway. And that's definitely, it takes courage.
Oh, 100%.
Awesome. Cool. Good question.
Very good.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. It's so great to have because ERP is definitely one of those things that scares people away. It doesn't leave the best taste in some people's mouths. And it's just really nice to hear like someone who's been through it who feels still really good about it.
Yeah. No, ERP definitely makes all the difference. And in the beginning, like to anyone, like when you hear the concept of ERP, you're like, what? That makes that's terrifying. Like, why would I do that? But I think the more that you do it, you then like see it actually working. And I think that's probably one of the best feelings is like being able to do something that you weren't able to do before. And you're like, wow, I actually was able to do that because of ERP and all the hard work I put in. So
Awesome. Here we go. Matthew, when dealing with harm OCD, is it okay to tell myself that I would never intentionally act on my thoughts, or should I tell myself that I don't know if I would or if I wouldn't, so that I can become used to uncertainty? So again, I would preface this with saying that it doesn't matter if it's harm OCD. Someone out there could easily have the same struggle. Should I tell myself that this thing is clean? Should I tell myself that this sexual intrusive thought is okay? So whatever your subtype is, like you can take what we have to say and just adapt it the way that you need to for your difficulties. So when you're experiencing anxiety as the result of an obsession, so if you're feeling anxious as the result of an intrusive experience, an idea, a thought, image, impulse, urge, or feeling, those are all the kind of ways that obsessions can come up as these intrusive experiences. We don't want you, ideally, we would not have you do anything to reduce the anxiety that you feel as the result of that obsession. So if you're having an obsession, you're having an intrusive thought or an image or a what if, ... and you're feeling anxious about that, and then you say to yourself, I would never actually act on those thoughts. And if that decreases your anxiety, even if it's just temporarily, we would conceptualize that as a ritual or a compulsion. And so while that might not seem as dangerous or as bad as maybe like Googling or throwing out all the sharp objects in your house or asking someone else if you would ever do that, I'm of the strong opinion that like even these small, subtle rituals, especially these like small, subtle self-assurance rituals, can really like snowball quite quickly. And if you teach your brain that this is what my brain needs to rely on, this self-assurance of I would never intentionally act on that. If you teach your brain that you need to rely on that to have your anxiety come down, you're just going to become more reliant on that in the future. You're going to need more of that because we know that OCD is never satisfied.
Oh, never.
So you're just going to need more of that. You're going to need more of it. So instead of having to remind yourself just once, eventually you might have to remind yourself 2 times or 3 times or 4 times. And then maybe it's something else altogether. Oh my gosh, am I going crazy? Why do I have to remind myself of this 4 times? And then maybe that's a whole new spin of the OCD, right? And so I'm of the firm opinion that in order to get over something, you have to go through it. In order to get over these harm intrusive thoughts, you are going to have to sit with that uncertainty in order to sit with that doubt. Because the reality is, and this is one of the fallacies too that strikes OCD people. People feel like sometimes, if I sit with the uncertainty and if I accept the uncertainty, that means that it's 50-50. Like either 50% I'm okay and I'm never going to act on these thoughts, or 50% like I am going to turn into a killer. Like just by allowing uncertainty and not ritualizing doesn't mean that you are 50. It's a 50-50 scenario. We don't know what that scenario is. It could be 0.00001%, but we're not going to exert any effort into trying to even figure that out. But we're also not going to settle for the fact that it's a 50-50. So what I would encourage you to do is to conceptualize that as a ritual. Let yourself just allow yourself to be uncertain. Sitting with anxiety and sitting with uncertainty is something that you allow. It's not something that you do. It's something that you allow. And so if you are ritualizing through that by having to remind yourself intentionally, I would never act on those thoughts, you're not allowing it. And so therefore you're disrupting the process. So I would encourage you to try to nip that in the bud. If you catch yourself really kind of automatically or habitually saying that to yourself, you can undo that. So Kathryn, this might be familiar to you, undos, the concept of undo. So if you catch yourself habitually doing something like this, more of a sneaky self-assurance type of ritual, you can undo that. So it's dang, didn't mean to do that. Just caught myself. Maybe I could actually act on these thoughts. I don't know. And so
it's never too late.
Yeah. And again, we don't know, right? We don't know. Someone could come and snap. You could snap. There's a TV show called Snapped about people who are super highly functioning. All of a sudden, they just completely snap. And I would encourage you. This is a Nathan Peterson classic. He's from Instagram over at OCD and Anxiety Online. He really is a fan of leaning into that uncertainty and leaning into that discomfort. So, going into the kitchen and cooking up those vegetables with that sharp knife and just totally leaning into that uncertainty and being I'm probably going to act on my thoughts one day. Yep. I'm a horrifically violent person. I'm going to give into these thoughts. That's something that I would do. I'm probably going to give into those thoughts by the end of the night. Come on, OCD. Give me all the harm intrusive thoughts that you got. Let's go. Let's do this. So yeah, those are some practical strategies that probably sound really backwards, but will hopefully be very, very helpful for you. Kathryn, what do you think?
No, I definitely think that one thing that's really important to recognize, and this is something that it took a while for me to just remember this and have it ingrained in my memory, but that whole idea that OCD is a cycle, and that it's so important to remember that in order for the cycle to stop, you actually have to stop, break it at some point. Because I think that even something I've had times where there might be a little compulsion that I have, and I'm oh, it's so small in comparison to this one. It's not going to matter. But then over time, you begin to realize, oh, that compulsion, maybe it started out super duper small, but it has the ability, if I keep on, engaging in it, it has the ability to grow and, increase in magnitude, and just the impact that it'll have. That one time ritualizing will turn into 3 and shortly. So I think definitely that idea of, with exposures and with, sitting with the uncertainty, is that idea that small compulsions and rituals are still rituals and compulsions, and just it's important to just break that cycle in any context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I say something to my members at NoCD. Small subtle rituals are the shrimp that feed the sea monster. So it can be really, really tempting to kind of justify oh, well, it's just a really quick self-assurance. What's the big deal? It's still the little pieces of scrap. It's like the little pieces of scrap that you're
still feeding it.
You're still feeding the beast, and like you're going to have to maintain that. You're gonna have to, like, what are you saying by saying that you still need to give it a little bit? Like, you're still welcoming its presence, essentially. You're still allowing it to exist. You're still allowing it to be there. Cool. Awesome. Really great question. I'm excited for this one. So, Kat, thank you so much for doing these. You are so welcome. I'm about to start ERP soon. Congratulations, friend. I'm nervous but hopeful. I would love to hear more about the firsthand experience of ERP / how you felt, if you don't mind. And I haven't talked about this in this webinar, but I also have lived experience with OCD. So I've been to my own ERP therapist. I've always been a little bit of an anxious person. That's why I fell in love with this work in the first place. That's why I fell in love with the treatment. I've always been one of those kids like, oh my God, I don't want to go to school. I'm so nervous. Okay, I got to go to school and I have to pretend that I love it. And I don't know, like it was just in my bones. Like I never liked anxiety to get the best of me, and I was always very competitive with it. And so when I went to school and I realized and was told that this was actually a treatment modality, it was actually ERP, I was like, I have to do this. This is like what I do in my life all the time. I love this. I'm meant to do this. And so, you know, just tried to keep it at bay, struggled with postpartum OCD big time. Lots of rituals, asking my husband to do things for me that I would never encourage my members to ask their family members to do. So I've been through ERP too. But I know it's so important to hear your perspective, Kathryn, because at the end of the day, like I'm still a therapist, like that side comes out easier for me. So Kathryn, what was your experience of ERP like, if you can go back there and kind of how it felt?
I mean, I still, like, to preface this, I still do ERP to this day. Like, I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that even if you've been in recovery for such a long period of time, if you've gone through intensive treatment, ERP is like a continued practice and is something that you just have to keep on doing, because the obsessions and, you know, the rituals and the desire to do a compulsion is still going to be there. So I think it's important to kind of remember that at the end of the day, you're still going to be doing it, even if you've been in recovery for a really long period of time. But to go back to the question, I think that ERP is really scary when you first start. I think it's even scary once you've done it for a long time. I think that whole concept just is really mind-boggling in the beginning. You're like, wait, why would I purposefully put myself in an anxiety-provoking situation? Aren't I supposed to like get rid of the OCD, not like, you know, dive deep into just my fears? And I think there's that whole idea of like trying to learn why it works in the first place. And I started it like shortly after I was diagnosed with OCD, but there's also like figuring out how ERP works best for you, I think is really important, because I had a therapist and the way that she did ERP just didn't work for me. And I think it's also finding out that sometimes in the beginning, once you start ERP, finding a good ERP therapist and finding someone who you have a good relationship with is so important. Because at least for me, it took a while to like find those people who I just had that connection with and felt like I could trust in the ERP process, because it's such a scary process to begin with, just facing your fears head on. And that's why it's so much more important to find someone who you're comfortable with and comfortable taking these steps with. But ERP was really scary. Like I said in the beginning, it was such a scary experience, just like, because the thing what I struggle with the most is like perfectionism in school. And, you know, being a student, that was something that I was facing on like a daily basis. And when I went to residential treatment, because I went to residential treatment for my OCD when I was going into my sophomore year of high school. And one of the things that when I went to residential, one of my big exposures was, you're not going to be doing any schoolwork while you're here. And that was just like the scariest thing. I was like, wait, what? I'm taking, what do I do? Like, it's the scariest thing. And but I'm still here. Like, even though it was probably one of the scariest exposures like I'd ever had to do in that moment, I like realized, I was like, oh, you know, after this actually works, like after time, you begin to realize, you're like, oh, even though this is maybe like the scariest thing I've ever done, like in my opinion, people with OCD and people who are constantly doing ERP are some of the bravest people. Like, not many people can say that they face their fears on a daily basis, and that they're constantly purposefully putting themselves in these situations. But yeah, so back to what I was saying is that it's really scary in the beginning, but it does get easier with time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having worked with literally hundreds of people who have started their ERP process, I can tell you right now, like, it's a unique experience. It's very, like, you starting ERP, it will feel harder to do your first exposure, I think, than it will feel to do like your very last exposure. Because even though the first exposure might be like a 3 on the 0 to 10 scale, like, it's not actually, like, all things considered, that difficult. It's a 3 out of a 10. And maybe let's say that the last exposure that you do, like your grand finale before treatment is over, or before you like discharge or whatever, that's actually like a 10 out of a 10. I bet you that 3 is going to feel harder, because by the time, like I had mentioned, right, like this is all like you're building a muscle. By the time that you get to your 10, your muscles are stronger. You feel more confident. You feel like more of a warrior. You just kind of trust in the process a little bit more. You trust your therapist. You trust your own abilities to deal with these things. And you can have more of that faith that you're going to take that jump and a net's going to appear. You can't see it, but you know why you're doing it. And you know that it'll be there, and your willingness has increased over that time, and you're willing to take that jump. So just know that, you know, it's going to feel harder at first. But that's just, it's like anything, like we've talked about, it's going to feel harder at first, like it would if you were training for a half marathon, if you were training to gain muscle. Like it all just takes a little bit of time for you to get your groove. There's a really great video out there for anyone who's starting ERP. It would actually be really great for all of you to watch, and maybe I can link it next time Kathryn's going on a response. But it's from Dr. Reed Wilson, and it's called The 8 Self-Help Principles for OCD. I think he did like a longer podcast on that topic, but essentially he's an OCD expert, one of my favorite people in the whole entire world. Dr. Reed Wilson, 8 Self-Help Principles for OCD. So there's a longer version of a podcast. I believe he was on the OCD Stories, but then he won an award for that podcast, I'm pretty sure. Wow. So there's a 5-minute version of him like accepting the award for that. And then he gives like a really condensed version. So those are both on YouTube. So if you just YouTube Dr. Reed Wilson and search for 8 Self-Help Principles for OCD, I think that would be really great for you to watch, Kat, because he goes over really great like bullet points of what he would want people who have OCD to know. Like, the game isn't 5 years from now or 3 months from now. It's right now. Like, whether you get better depends on how you handle this moment right here, right now. I think that's a really good reminder. Other really good reminders are other things that he mentions, including like just that this work is scary, but it's not complicated. So not allowing it to complicate things for you. So lots of really great stuff. Just know that you can do it. Give yourself some patience and be on the lookout. Know that OCD is really going to try to take advantage of your drive to get well. It's very typical and very expected and predictable for the OCD to have you start doubting treatment, to have you start doubting whether you have OCD, to have you start doubting your therapist, to have you start doubting your exposures or whether this is the right treatment for you. Just know that it's coming. Know that it's coming. It's another one of the OCD's dirty tricks. You don't have to participate in that discussion. Just, I see you coming. I see you. I'm going to treat that like an obsession, and you don't need to participate in that at all. So I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited.
That's amazing.
So cool. So cool. It's really, yeah. To work with someone on ERP, that's one of my favorite things, to work with someone on ERP when they have no prior experience of it. Super, super cool. So many good questions.
Yeah.
I feel like you'll have a lot to say about this. This is kind of related to what we were talking about. I start therapy soon and I'm very wishful and excited to see the treatment, but all of a sudden I'm so scared to not be scared of the thoughts anymore. Backdoor spike.
Yeah.
Backdoor spike. How do you become okay with these terrible thoughts? So when we say backdoor spike, this is a really, again, like very predictable, common, and almost like we see this coming. Like we see this coming. This is such a predictable pattern. It's like the grand finale at the end of a scary movie. Like it's kind of cheesy. Like you think that it's scary, but it's actually kind of cheesy. So the OCD, when it does this backdoor spike, is, you know, you commit yourself to treatment, you commit to it, you have everything lined up, and then it's like, but what does that say about you that you're not scared anymore? What is that going to say about you when you don't have when you actually don't have anxiety over seeing kids in bathing suits? What does that mean about you? Yeah. What does it mean about you that you're not going to care as much about your schoolwork, Kathryn? Like, is this really all that good for you in the first place? Shouldn't you be more anxious about your schoolwork?
Yeah.
And so it's awful. So what do you think about that? How did you, if that came up for you, and like, how did you kind of surrender to the whole thing?
Oh, it's definitely like, even like Jenna, what you were saying, it's so like, it's predictable. Like even like it's happened to me a bunch of times, and I think it'll continue happening, is that idea of when you start like really getting better with a specific thing. Like thinking of something that I've been doing recently with my therapist is we've been doing like a lot of like TV show exposures and watching things that like trigger me, and we watch like the shows together. And there's one specific show that we were watching that had like some things that really triggered my OCD, and it really triggered a lot of intrusive thoughts for me, and it was just like really anxiety provoking. And when I first started out, I could barely watch it. And when we continued watching it, like by the end of like the season, I was like, wait, I actually like this. And then my OCD is like, wait, you like this? How could you possibly like this? This is
what does that mean about you?
Yes. What does it mean about me as a person? Like, did I change as a person? Am I a terrible person now? Like, did my ERP turn me into this person that is somehow okay with watching this?
Do you ever
and actually enjoys it? Oh, yes. That one too. Like, did you even know who you were to begin with? Like, were you just a terrible person in the beginning and you just didn't know? Like, there's just all these fun little ways that OCD likes to pull you in all these different directions. But I think definitely like coming to understand what it is and being able to identify what it is makes it a lot easier, and kind of be like, oh, that's what it is. Like, this is going to happen. I think that makes it easier in the future to kind of spot it and say, okay, this is happening, and I just need to sit with it. And maybe I am now a terrible person now that I enjoy it. And we are just going to sit with that uncertainty. So I think there's that whole idea of just knowing what it is, identifying it, and then just kind of like existing with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The analogy that comes to mind here for me is, if any of you out there have kids or toddlers or have interacted with toddlers, for the most part, we're told, like, if we've probably all witnessed this, right? Like a toddler falls and it's just like a big fall. Like, you know that had to have hurt. And what you're supposed to do in those situations, you know, the toddler falls and they kind of look at you like, okay, how do I interpret the situation? Like, are you freaking out? Should I be freaking out? Am I okay? What you're not supposed to do in that situation is you're not supposed to like make this big drama about it, right? Like, you're supposed to just, honey, you fell. What's up? How you feeling? Like, you're supposed to just kind of play it cool, even though on the inside you might be freaking out, especially, you know, when this happens with my toddler. On the inside, I'm freaking out and I'm like, oh my God, is he okay? Is he okay? And I want to like just scream and gasp and make this big drama about it. But you're really not supposed to do that, because it adds to their anxiety. Like it provides them with this message that I'm anxious about it, so you should be anxious about it. And so then we just both become worked up. Versus if I'm just like cool and collected on the external side, right? Regardless of what's going on internally, he interprets that as like, okay, well, oh my God. This is exactly what happens when it comes to us having intrusive thoughts. Us having intrusive thoughts are essentially like the toddler falling. And then the toddler kind of looks at you and is like, okay, how am I going to interpret this? And those thoughts are up for interpretation. We all have intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are common. They're commonly and universally experienced. And so it's not the thought that's the problem. It's the interpretation of that thought as being somehow significant, that you need to take responsibility for it, that it's a terrible thought, that it requires any type of action or whatever. And so when you have that intrusive thought, it's kind of like the toddler who fell, and now it's up for interpretation. Like, okay, what's DJ Herigstad gonna do with this situation? Like, how do I interpret this? And so your response, DJ, whether you ritualize, freak out, go on Google and start to like Google and research all the things, like that's you basically making a big drama when the toddler falls. Your brain is kind of like, okay, well, I guess this is a terrible thought. Otherwise, DJ Herigstad wouldn't have gone to these actions to try to make himself feel better about it. So I guess these thoughts are bad. Now, if you can reverse that and you instead just like remain calm, cool, and collected, at least externally, maybe internally, you feel irresponsible or you feel bad or you feel the urge to do these rituals. As long as you don't ritualize, you are essentially giving that toddler or giving your brain the message like that this doesn't require any type of drama. This doesn't require any type of reaction, and I'm going to keep it cool. I'm going to show you, brain, that you don't need to protect yourself from it anymore because I'm not responding as though it is threatening. The reason that you and all these other people and all of us feel the need to protect ourselves from these thoughts is because we act as though they are threatening, right? And so the only way to stop perceiving them as bad or threatening is to coexist with them, like Kathryn said, like truly be able to coexist with them, allow them to be there. These thoughts can either be there or they cannot be there, but I'm still going to go and do whatever it was that I wanted to do today anyway, without judgment. Without judgment. All righty. I would love to get Dr. Reed Wilson on my podcast. Oh my gosh. Although I actually probably wouldn't because I would be way too nervous.
Exposure.
I would be way too nervous. That would be like I would just be, when I get anxious, I get like hives.
Oh,
I would
no.
just get red and anxious the entire time. Oh. So no one sent it my way. It's an exposure I don't want. If I get an email from Dr. Reed Wilson that says, hey, a lot of people from the OCD community said that I should reach out to you and be in your podcast, I will know that it was from the people from this webinar. I love Dr. Reed Wilson. He is so good. He's so good, you guys. Look him up. He has books. He has tons of great things. Okay. One more question. Let's say there was a really good one and now I missed it. Kathryn, too, if you got a shout out from Unstuck.
Oh yes. I love Unstuck.
There you go. So many people don't know about it.
Oh, it's amazing. No, it's such a great resource, especially for kids with OCD and people who are just like getting started, and even anyone of any age is just seeing like the courage that these kids have.
Oh
it's
my
amazing.
Gosh, so cool. Mm-hmm. I had a really good one. Maybe it was up here. Oh, this one. It was the very, very first one.
Oh, awesome.
I have a good relationship with my mom, but I can't work up the courage to ask to get tested for OCD. I'm struggling mentally and I don't know what to do. Also, what are the support groups like? So I can definitely talk about the support groups. And I'd love to give my feedback, like as a therapist, kind of what to do in this situation and, some ways that you can talk to your mom. But as someone like Kathryn, there must have been, I'm curious, like what your experience was. Like, did you tell your family that you wanted to get this figured out? Did they kind of talk to you about it? Like, how did that work? And what advice would you have for Emma?
Yeah, I kind of had a very like unique situation in the sense my mom is a school psychologist, and so she kind of already like knew a lot of things about just like different like mental illnesses and just kind of what they entailed. And I got started in therapy really early on. Like my mom and dad were like, "Oh yeah, she's really anxious. We need to help her in some way." So I was really lucky in that sense. But my mom actually, because I started having a lot of really like significant OCD symptoms when I was like 12 or 13. And my mom kind of pointed out and she's like, "Oh, I think this might be OCD." And so then she took me to an OCD specialist where I then got like officially diagnosed and then started on ERP. But I think I know with a lot of people, I've heard like, I know that most people's situations aren't like that. But I've heard like a bunch of different ways that people have really gone and like told their families about it. Like I had a friend who, when she figured out that she had OCD, she kind of she wrote her parents a letter because it was like much easier for her to kind of explain and have it kind of all pre-written out and just hand to them. And it was really easy for her to do. And I think in any situation, like obviously I can't speak to this because I'm not a parent, but I think in any situation, like a parent wants to be supportive of their kids and doesn't want to see them struggle. And I know with OCD can cause incredible suffering and pain. And I think any parent would want their child to not have to live like that and just get the help that they need. And I mean, obviously there are going to be like preconceived notions of like what OCD really, what OCD is based on just like society and what like we've kind of been taught and what's been like spread in the media. But I think just really taking the time, maybe giving them, resources, like finding like an article or a website or just something to go to where maybe you don't necessarily have to explain it, but just guide them towards different ways to learn more about it. But yeah,
I think those are all really great examples. The example that I like comes to mind for me, for you, is to show them a video, like to show them like, "Mom, I just watched this and I feel like this is what goes on in my head. Like this feels like it's it to me." And so luckily there are so many. You could use one of these webinars. You could use the Unstuck movie. Like they have lots of little trailers on there that I think like have kids' perspectives who have OCD. And I think that might be a really good way of just like breaking the ice. It seems like it's like you already feel like you have it. You're already obviously like navigating the resources that are available to you on the internet. And it seems like you have a good relationship with your mom, which is wonderful. And so now it's just a matter of like breaking through that like feared moment and kind of like just breaking the ice, which can be uncomfortable. So yeah. So, and the support groups are awesome. A couple people have mentioned in the comments that it's really good, like that they've been to the support groups and that they find it really helpful. So we have young support groups. We have support groups for young adults. We have support groups for students who have OCD. So Emma, that might be a good opportunity for you to try to get into one of the support groups and see how they work for you. But yeah, really great opportunity for you to be with people who struggle similarly to you and all that good stuff. So that's all we have for today. Kathryn, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to kind of, tell people where they can find you. I will link you guys one more time to Kathryn's Instagram. And Kathryn, I don't know if you have anything else going on. I know I'm just kind of primarily on Instagram, but if you have anything else or any other resources that you'd like to share or advocate for, yeah, just now is your time. Where can we find more of you?
Yeah, so my like main platform is my Instagram, the Road to Recovery from OCD, where there's an underscore between each word, so it's kind of long. But yeah, most of my things are on there, and just There are so many great people. Like I kind of have found that once you start to like look at one person, you start to find all these other resources. And like I would just say that just the OCD community is just so incredible and just makes you feel so much less alone, and just seeing other people who are living life with it. Like for me, it's really inspiring, like seeing people like as like a young adult and as someone who's in college, seeing people who've graduated college, who have careers, who have relationships and families, and still live daily, fight the daily battle with OCD. So I think just really I could not recommend it enough, but just really becoming immersed in that community, because it's really incredible. And I wish that when I first got diagnosed and when I first got started, that community was there. And obviously it's grown so much since, even in like the last year. I know so many more people have become a part of it, so I would just recommend that to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, like even for the support groups, you don't have to commit to those, right? Like just take the pressure off. Give it a try. Like just see. I'm gonna see what these are about. Hard Quirk is another really great resource too. If ours don't work for you or your schedule doesn't work for our support groups, Hard Quirk also offers really awesome support groups too, for people who have OCD and also for caregivers. So yeah, Kathryn, I've linked you guys to Kathryn one more time, both on Facebook and on YouTube. So I'll be back tomorrow with Megan Tobin. She's another OCD therapist here at NoCD. So we're going to have two experts here tomorrow who are therapists. Dr. McGrath will be back on Wednesday. He'll have another guest with him. And then on Thursday, we have Emily Feldman. So Emily Feldman was here with me, I think last Tuesday with Jackie. So Emily will be back back on our webinar on Thursday to talk more. I will link really quickly the support groups. And then I also linked to you guys, if you scroll up, the Dr. Reed Wilson video, my favorite video of all time. The best like 5 minutes of OCD education on the internet, that video by Dr. Reed Wilson. Well, thank you guys so much. I really, admire all of your courage, Kathryn. Like, so cool to have you here. So good to have you.
Thank you.
So yeah, I wish you all the best in your continued recovery. Keep coming back for all of these webinars, all this great information, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.